And that is it. So this is the whole of the inside of the first cottage. And I have now established for definite that it was a row of cottages. I think a couple of people might have mentioned that in the comments of another video I showed when I showed a map, because the garden in that map was split into multiple plots at different plot numbers, implying that there might be multiple dwellings. And it is. So it was one long building. So it's all a continuous building, a long strip, narrow building going back that way. But it was split from another map I've seen into 5 individual kind of buildings, possibly all dwellings. But I think the final 2 would have been outbuildings. So I've seen more recent maps from late 19th, early 20th century, yeah, showing it split into 5. And this is the first cottage of at least 2 or 3 cottages, I think. And the footprint of the second one will be just over there. I'm very confident that will be there. And that, judging by the picture, that's slightly bigger than this one, in fact. And I would think it would be to the same level of the walls, and the floor hopefully will still be there beyond that wall. And then possibly the third one, maybe part, if not whole of the third one, it depends. So this piece of the garden starts to kind of run out and it goes into a neighbour's property, and also the floor level goes a lot lower because there's a kind of a driveway going to another property. So I think there might be part of the third cottage, but not the whole thing. But there's only one way to find out for definite. But there definitely will be a second cottage beyond that wall. So there's a lot more excavating to do another time. There certainly won't be doing that this year, or starting that this year, or we might start next year. But that's what I found. And yeah, and the floor from this first cottage has come up pretty well. So let me show you around and let me show you what I found from this first part. So the floor came up pretty well with the pressure washer. It's very difficult to get spotlessly clean because there's just so much grime everywhere. And you start spraying, you accidentally spray some of the walls and grime just sprays all over the place. But it's much cleaner than it was, and you can see the detail of the stonework much more clearly. And a lot of them are more cracked than I originally knew. But the main thing I think brought up from cleaning this, and I'm more confident about now, is that there was in fact another internal dividing wall within this one cottage. So you see that kind of strip there. There's a kind of wide gap between the stonework, much wider than it is elsewhere, because it runs directly in line with this little bit of wall I found on the other side, which I had already seen before the washing. So it's only comes out about a foot from this side wall, the external wall. And I think it would have stopped kind of here, and then there would have been a doorway, that's a doorway, those kind of patchwork of stones there. And then there was another wall stretching from here, where my foot is, to the edge. So I guess this bit here, this final bit of the room, would have been another room, as it were. There were 2 real rooms, both tiny. Given the existence of this second room on this ground floor, my thinking now is that this must have been most likely was a single-storey dwelling. I suppose my initial assumption was that there would have been 2 stories, just because that's the most common type of dwelling. It's not that common, even amongst old buildings, to have single stories. But I just think that this second room was presumably a bedroom, and there was this big, well, not big, small even, ground floor. This whole ground floor living area was split into 2, both very small rooms, one a kitchen living space and the other a sleeping area. So this whole space I dug out, the internal of this building I measured the width before, this width here, so that's just about approximately 11 feet wide, so 3.25 meters, I think. And then the length, which I've just measured now, is 4.5 meters, I think around 15 feet long. And this smaller room is about 5 feet wide. It's a 1.6 meters. Yeah, so that's about 5 feet by 11 feet. That space there, that would have been behind this thin internal wall. So that's my current theory, I suppose, that there was a sleeping area here and then a living space. There's obviously no internal staircase, otherwise I would have found the base. I suppose it's possible there was a loft roof space area with a wooden ladder, just a basic wooden ladder or wooden steps that were taken away going up to it. And that was my initial theory, that this would have been one up, one down with a ground floor living area and a sleeping area on a second level. But given this second room, my theory has changed to there just being one ground floor whole living space. This is the remainder of the tree stump that I took out. It took me a very, very long time. And there are a few roots over there as well, growing straight into the walls. But this is the main root, which I cut with a reciprocating saw, which is why it's stained yellow from the blade. but it seems to have grown through this piece of metal. It's like some kind of pronged, yeah, piece of metal, so maybe the head of a tool, a fork or something, or a rake. So there's one there, one prong on the other side. I also cut through one, that's one there, I cut through that with a saw, and then one there. It's just grown straight through it for some reason. And I will cut the rest of that away as much as I can, and also the other roots, and I suppose poison them, because otherwise they'll sprout back up again. And by the tree stump at this end, there are in fact 2 flagstones, 2 of the floor stones missing. I initially thought when I found this, I got quite excited, thinking that maybe there was a hole. It was the start of a staircase down to a cellar level. But obviously it's far too small for that. I mean, it's very, very small, that space. There's only 2 small flagstones missing. And someone obviously must have taken them away. I'm not really sure why. All the other stones on the floor are still there, as you can see. And if you're going to take up the floor, if anything, the first stone is the most difficult one to take out. And once you've got the first one out, prying the rest of them out, levering them out is more straightforward. So somebody has taken 2 of the smallest stones in the floor away for some reason. I mean, they must have been purposefully removed. And I have dug down. I did sort of dig down a little bit into there just to check that there was no stone underneath. And if you put a spade down through there, it doesn't hit anything. It's just hardcore. I think I may in future dig down a little bit further just out of interest, I suppose, to see what's underneath the base that's underneath the rest of these stones. But there's nothing there. And I didn't find the flagstones elsewhere whilst I was digging this out, so they obviously again were taken away. So it was fairly humble accommodation, I guess. I'm still fairly confident it was a row of workers' cottages, possibly for a local farm. A few people in the comments mentioned the stone floor in relation to that, I suppose, querying whether it was a kind of too expensive a floor, too expensive a building to have been used by as worker accommodation, and saying maybe it was a more grand building. But I don't think that's very likely. Although maybe today we think of this as a premium product, and certainly some of these flagstones, if you built a floor or patio of this size today, it would be quite expensive. But back then they would have used the local materials, and in fact there is on local maps I've seen, there's a disused stone quarry very close by to here, maybe half a mile. So I imagine a lot of the stone came from there. And back then, again, just the local materials would have been the cheaper option. These days, of course, people make patios out of manufactured block paving or cheap imported sandstone, which is by far the cheaper option, and it's much more expensive to build things out of local materials. But back then, you just would have used what was available and what was local. So I don't think it signifies that it was a grand or building that was occupied by people with money. I don't think that at all. I just think stone was what was available, and they built everything out of this. The other finding of note was, of course, the bread oven, which was the first thing I uncovered. So you can see it's got this base of fire bricks, and there was also seemingly a ring of fire bricks going around in the inside that I assume would have carried on around here. Although stopping here, because there's a connecting passageway, as it were. It goes through. It's not a perfect circle. The bulk of it is circular, but then there's this little passageway that connects to the range, which obviously would have been the source of heat. I assume they would have had a fire in the range, and then there was a means of drawing heat up and over a domed bread oven through either having the chimney above the bread oven or maybe a secondary flue, and then the entrance would have been here. So you can see that up and over this, and then down into this. And quite a few people have asked what I have done with the waste that I've dug out of here. So obviously I've been barrowing the soil out of this space. So I'll show you. It's easy to show you where I've been keeping it. So there is a disused corner of this site, this little part of the garden, which is up and over here. There's a slight incline, but it's not too far away. So you can see there. That is probably 75% of what I've dug out. There is a smaller pile elsewhere, and some of it did go to landfill. I did hire what's called a builder's skip in the UK, which is a standard size 8 cubic yards, a dumpster, I believe they're called elsewhere in the world. But that didn't last very long at all. I filled that in about 2 days. So overwhelmingly it's all come over here. So this is, I don't know how many tons and tons this is, but it's a lot. And this has been sifted and most of it, and I've run metal detector over it, but I'm sure that if you ran a metal detector over this, you would still find quite a few bits and pieces in here. Found a few more bits and pieces in this phase of the dig. Most of the same kind of stuff, really. I found this, I showed a picture of this on my channel before, the pig's head, lower and upper parts of a pig's jaw, and a few other fragments which I think are from the upper jaw that have broken away. I in fact found this, it was buried in it was wrapped in black plastic. I assume it's just a bin liner, a trash bag that someone, I guess, had dumped there and tried to bury maybe, and then they hit the wall and they couldn't go any further. But I first started pulling this jawbone, this lower jaw, and saw these teeth out of this black plastic bag that was buried. I mean, obviously on any kind of inspection, it quite clearly is not a human jawbone because it's far too elongated and it's got too few teeth, and it's got these weird, the kind of pig tusks at the front. But when you first see teeth and you're pulling it out of black plastic, I thought I found a murder victim that someone had dumped here. Someone had dumped in the wall. But no, it's just a pig's head. So thank you to the people who confirmed that it was a pig's head, pig's jaw. Mr. Pig Farmer. It's very helpful to have people who have a wide range of experience and knowledge. A few other pieces of metal. I did try using this evapo rust, which you soak metal in, but I think really the metal items are just too rusty for it to work really. It mostly just discoloured the items, if anything. As you see, it turned to that yellowy colour. But a few more bits and pieces of latches and hinges. That looks like possibly a miniature horseshoe. Maybe it's not. It's certainly horseshoe shaped, as you can see, or U-shaped, but it's maybe a bit too small for that. An iron stake, kind of heavy-duty iron stake. That's more modern. That's a shelving bracket of some kind, I think. That's another more modern piece of scrap metal. This, I think, I found something similar to this before. It was near the fireplace. I'm not entirely sure what they are. This, weirdly, I pulled out of the soil. I think this is one of those things you use to open a mains water kind of manhole cover. I have no idea what that was doing there. This, I think, possibly is part of a bike. It's a hollow piece of tubing. It has what looks like a hole for a screw or fixing at the end. But again, just trash that's been dumped here, really. This I found in a corner over there. It's just a thin piece of shaped metal like that. Not quite sure what that is. This looks like a tool of some kind. It's got a handle there, and then this rectangular piece at the end, which I think the bottom of it has rusted away, and it used to have more underneath that. Couple more jars. This jar, in fact, I showed before, but I hadn't opened it. Hadn't opened the lid. It just had a couple of washers in there. It does have some numbers on the bottom, but I think it's just the serial numbers. B5514 RUGB. I wasn't sure if that was meant to say rugby, but they missed the Y. But it's all a bit scattered around. I'm not really sure about that. There's no clues as to the year. Another jar. Again, not sure there's any writing on this. I don't think. This, I think, wasn't sure if this was the head of a phone, an old, although it's ceramic, an old phone head. As in, that's the end for your, well, I suppose mouth or ear. I don't know, but it looks like it might be something like that. That's a beer bottle top. Get a focus on that. What does that say? Stroud Brewery. Again, much of this is more recent rubbish, trash that people have dumped here by the previous owners of the property. Some rusty old cans of various kind, grease cans, some more late 20th century rubbish, JCB genuine parts, a double decker wrapper, which is a chocolate bar, like a candy bar here, a creme caramel pot, that has those that foil bit in the top where you plonk it down onto a plate and then pull that off to release the seal, but it's obviously just been opened from the top and eaten out with a spoon, probably by me, to be honest, or my brother when we were kids. This is an old Pepsi can I think it must be fairly old. I don't think they've even sold Pepsi cans like this in my lifetime, I would think. It's got an old style ring pull, as you can see. They don't use those anymore for soda cans. And old style branding as well. And Pepsi don't use that branding anymore. But someone in the comments might know, when was the last time in the UK they sold Pepsi cans like that? I'm going to say maybe 30, 40 years ago. I certainly have no memory of ever seeing these when I was a kid in the 1990s. A few other bits of ceramics. And that was really it. I mean, there were a few more bits and pieces, more nails and things, all the regular stuff that I found before. But not that much else this time round. But I'm hopeful, as ever. You've got to remain optimistic that I'll find a pot of gold when I move into the next cottage and the next part of the excavation. But that's really about it. And finally, just in terms of my plans for the next phases of the project, I in fact don't plan to immediately begin excavating the next cottage or the next building or buildings. I'm going to leave those for the time being and take a pause in digging and start doing patching up and rebuilding parts of what I've uncovered so far, so this first cottage. So my overall plan, which I have mentioned in comments but people keep on asking, is what I'm planning to turn it into an outdoor walled garden feature. I don't plan to rebuild it and make it into a dwelling, a whole building, for a variety of reasons, but I would just prefer to make it into a garden feature. So I'm going to restore the range behind me and the walls and turn it into an outdoor kitchen. So restore the range as best I can and rebuild a pizza/bread oven using the existing base. I'm going to complete the steps up from the roadside and put a new gate in there. Possibly build a stone archway in the front entrance of the cottage, or at least certainly build and restore parts of the front entrance, and generally just turn this into a walled garden area with obviously kind of a patio in the middle. And I will be putting out a few videos about that next year. In 2023, probably a few months in between them. They're all quite big projects that will take me some time. I may do them at a slower pace, and obviously I will talk more and explain more about what I'm planning for each part as I go through them. But that's kind of what I have planned. I wanted to let you know because people are interested and keep on asking what I'm going to be doing. And thank you all for watching, and thank you all for your support if you've watched several of my videos, which I'm sure many of you have. And I will be putting out more about this next year. And I will have one more video coming out this year, I think on Christmas Day or possibly Christmas Eve it will be for some of you, depending where you are in the world. Nothing to do with this project, just a completely different silly little video I'm putting together for Christmas. But apart from that, I will see you again next year. Thanks guys, bye.